Archie, also known as Ausome Charlie, and she's going to talk to us today about discovering your neurotype in adulthood.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. So this isn't my typical kind of a talk, because my usual niche is autism and neurodiversity inclusion in the workplace. But you guys are mostly solopreneurs and you've already escaped the rat race. So I have had to tailor it for this audience, so I hope it's okay. If at first you don't succeed, try again. No, that's just, put that in the bin, that's just absolute nonsense. Actually, if you're trying and doing your best and struggling and not quite succeeding, maybe there's a valid reason why, and maybe it would be better to stop and take stock and have a good think, go through some introspection and work out why things are harder for you than they are for other people. That's what I've realised, it's taken me way too long. This isn't a typical motivational keynote speech or anything. I'm not any kind of inspiration porn. I'm not going to be telling you about how to overcome autism or anxiety or anything like that. And there's no answers in determination and positive thinking and affirmations. You can't pray your struggle away. What I want to talk to you about is understanding how your brain is wired and knowing your own neurotype. Some of you probably think you're neurotypical and that this doesn't apply. If you've escaped the rat race to set up your own business, I would say that that's probably quite unlikely. But some of you probably are neurodivergent and you already know. Others just entertain the possibility that you might be. If you've got anyone in your family, especially who's autistic or ADHD or dyslexic or anything like that, if you suffer anxiety, if you have any sensory issues, it's really worth looking into it and finding out more. So, why? I mean, what if you've always had this game called life set on a harder level than all of the other players? Kind of feel on their back foot. Maybe they've noticed, maybe your intellectual peers have seen you slipping behind. Maybe they even have no idea why, but they're not likely to say anything because there's still a stigma. So this is the problem. So we can end up bumbling through life with various obstacles and really struggling and having no idea why. Now, if you do know why, it doesn't mean that life is automatically set to an easier level. It just means you can strategize better. There's support you can get, there's things that you can do to get help, to help yourself. Mainly, you can lean into your strengths and you can work out how to get around the challenges. So that it's how it plays out for you. You can blunder through life wondering why you're struggling, or you can have a really good hard look at yourself and do a lot of research and think, wouldn't my life be easier if I didn't have to work these set hours or work with this sensory environment or with these people? So it's just about the fact that some of us are in survival mode and that isn't good enough, and we need to know ourselves and know what it is to thrive. So this is my story. I grew up, I was a bit of a weird kid, very clever, quite capable, but I didn't really fit in. I was bullied a lot for being weird and different, ugly, square. Yeah, I wasn't fashionable. I went to a school where there was no school uniform, which really didn't help me because the in-crowd popular kids were all fashion victims. If you didn't have the latest Campari shell suits and Nike trainers and headbag, yeah, I'm showing my age now, then you were just a target for bullies. But there was more to it than that. I didn't have the money to be fashionable, but I didn't want to either. I was always a bit weird and different and quirky. I was blessed with a couple of really good friends at school that were just as quirky as me in different ways. And that got me through school because I was a target for bullies. My parents used to say to me things like, don't worry about them. You'll have a more successful life and you'll be happier than them in the long run. You don't worry about them calling you clever and square. Do your work. You'll go to university. You'll get a good job. Yeah, that hasn't really worked out great for me either. So my brother is autistic and ADHD with learning difficulties. So when I was a kid, that was my frame of reference for autism. He never fit into a neat pigeonhole because no kids ever did. So for the first 10 years or so of his life, they called him mentally handicapped, which I think is awful. So it's so stigmatising. This is a person with strengths and needs and challenges. But when he was diagnosed autistic, it should be that the pennies dropped with me and my family as well, that maybe that was why I was weird and different and struggling. But no, because I was clever, I had potential. Because I was a girl, I could socially camouflage and fit in a little. Because society tells you, no, the lights aren't too bright, and no, the background noise isn't too much, and no, PE isn't terrifying. You just find yourself going through life, putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, and just putting up with it. But this continued for me, so by the time I hit my mid-teens, I was getting mercilessly bullied, mostly verbally, but to me, sticks and stones make break your bones. No, that's just codswallop as well. The verbal cuts are deeper for me. I can get haunted for decades by negative things people have said to me that have dented my self-esteem. And it's like that all the time when you're a teenager and you don't fit in. So rather than rising above it, like my parents tried to teach me, I tried to rebel. So I was trying to show them how daring I was, how adventurous and brave, and, you know, getting myself into quite a lot of mischief actually, and never doing any homework, because only squares and clever clogs and teachers' pets do homework. So I've managed to get through GCSEs and A-levels anyway, because I was bright and I could apply myself in exams. When I got to university though, no adult supervision, no, I wasn't equipped with any skills for how to motivate myself and any self-discipline, getting my work done. So I just fell off the rails big time, hung around with bikers and goths and went to nightclubs all the time, heavily self-medicated with drinks and drugs. I didn't do any coursework, and I couldn't even do a simple thing like join the computer room, and there's no way that I was going to type out an assignment by hand, write it out by hand. So I just really, I was an absolute disaster area. I was so far off the rails. And open to abuse as well. So there are people out there, sexual predators, who will look at a young woman, reasonably attractive young woman I'm told, who was called ugly at school, pay them a bit of attention, and then have them fawning after them. So a lot of young women find themselves in this situation. They're looking for validation in all the wrong places, from predatory, usually men. It doesn't always have to be men, but we're very susceptible to abuse and very vulnerable. But because I was the clever one, the one with potential, my parents had no idea. So there's me just completely trashing my life, well off the rails. I ended up dropping out of university at the end of the first year, did a string of unsuccessful relationships, holding unsuitable men on pedestals and letting them walk all over me. Series of unsuitable jobs, including glamour modelling, stripograms, all sorts. This isn't the adulthood that my parents envisaged for me at all. I had a genius IQ, for God's sake, but that was me. And eventually, when I was about 24, I was lucky enough to meet a man who, it turned out he wasn't suitable for me. He was my first husband. We're not together anymore for good reasons, but he was able to get me on a fairly even keel. We owned our own house, I got a job, gradually worked my way up the ladder. I worked in HR, which was by accident, and then found out that I was really good with data and projects and the analytical, methodical side of HR, not the people pleasing nor the diplomatic side. My diplomacy skills are very lacking. But I'd still at this point got absolutely no idea that I was different to anybody else and that there was any concrete reason that I was struggling. But when I had my first child, Iggy, and I went back to work following maternity leave, suddenly I couldn't cope. And there was probably an element of postnatal depression, but more, I was completely overwhelmed. I was trying to fit in at work, trying to hold down this job in HR, with crippling low self-esteem, a sickly baby, I wasn't ready for it, and just I couldn't cope at all. From there started a 15-year period of high anxiety, chronic overwhelm and regular bouts of depression. Every time I go to the doctor saying I can't take this anymore, I can't cope, usually struggling to get those words out with tears running down my face, they would do the old questionnaire. It's like a tick box exercise. Oh yeah, you tick all the boxes for depression. Let's chuck some SSRIs at it. Let's tell you to take a month off work. And I would go for country walks, I'd read books, do the things that make me feel better, and without knowing it was self-care, but I would then bounce back stronger every time. And then a few months later, it would be usually something like I'm working on 2 projects at once, or I'm working on something and there's deadlines, but then my kid is sick. Every now and then I would just hit another wall like that and be completely unable to cope. Doctors call it depression, throw some SSRIs at it. Now, by the time my eldest child was 14, I thought, this is bullshit. This isn't just chronic anxiety and depression, low self-esteem. There's something going on here, there's something more than that. And he was anxious as well. When he started high school, I took him to a child and adolescent psychiatrist because he'd had really severe anxiety attacks at school. He'd had problems fitting in middle school, but at high school it manifested like anxiety attacks. So off we went to the Priory Wellbeing Centre in Birmingham, because we had private health insurance at the time through work, and the psychiatrist there really listened to what he had to say, asked him some probing questions about how these anxiety attacks felt to him and what he was going through. He describes his heart racing and wanting to cower in a corner, and just like took himself away. And she said at the end of the session, yes, he has severe anxiety, but there's an underlying cause, and that cause is autism. He has Asperger's syndrome. We don't use that as a diagnostic term for various reasons. It's all autism spectrum disorder now. I just call it autism. But Iggy was autistic, and so was I. What he described, I felt as well. The struggles he'd had fitting in, I had them as well. The difference was he was 14, I was 42. So fortunately for me, I went to the doctors. I'd done my research, and I went to the doctors with a bulleted list of reasons I thought I was autistic. And the doctor referred me. Unfortunately for me, he thought that I'd got borderline personality disorder. So he said to me, it could be that you come out of this assessment and the answers you get are not the answers that you're looking for, and I want you to be brave and face up to it. And it's only later I realised he thought it was borderline personality disorder, and not wanting to stigmatise that further, but it is quite often an incorrect diagnosis given to young autistic people, especially women and those identified female at birth. But off I went, did a lengthy questionnaire. What I didn't realise at the time, they don't just ask you the questions, it's not just what answers you give, it's how. So she was looking at my verbal and non-verbal communication, things like how I use my hands, things like my face, so I go from expressionless to wide-eyed and animated and back, and that isn't how a neurotypical person would usually hold their face. So there's little clues, and they say it's an invisible disability, but there are actually a lot of visual clues, and that's why autistic people can usually identify each other. It's like order, you know, like gaydar, but yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I was really smug then. I had a new spring in my step. Suddenly, there was a mitigation for my struggles. There was a reason that I had difficulties with things that my intellectual peers took for granted. So I went to work and said to my manager, guess what? Yes, I've been diagnosed autistic. And she said, I assume you're happy about it, because I was grinning from ear to ear. Well, yes. I already had reasonable adjustments in place for anxiety, so we tweaked those a bit now that we knew that it was autism. But the main reason it helped me is I was then able to look at the reasons that I was getting depressed every few months. It never came from nowhere. I did think it was bipolar when I went to my doctor because it was cyclical, but actually when you look at it, it isn't just phases that come and go with time. There's always a trigger. And for me, it's a period of having to do heavy masking, like I would do if I was working on a project with a lot of project team meetings, and I'm trying not to dominate the conversation. I'm trying not to interrupt anybody. I want to appear professional. I need this professional veneer. I need to make sure everyone has a say and not railroad anybody's point. So I'm going through that, and then if I'm also spending a lot of time one-to-one with somebody as well, then I don't get the time that I need with my head down, and that might be engrossed in a spreadsheet, or it might be taking time off and going for a walk, but I need time to myself. And if I'm always sitting with somebody training them up how to do my day job whilst working on a project and being in meetings, there's no me time at all, and it's just constantly overwhelming. So I was able to look at the triggers, and I realised that it's this thing called autistic burnout. I was going through cycles of burnout, then I was getting the time off, regulating myself, and then I was going back stronger and hyperproductive. So what looked like bipolar, it's actually just that I needed to change the way that I worked a bit and the way that people work with me, so that I could lean into my strengths and avoid the triggers of burnout. So this was great for me, but I shouldn't be so smug, because it took me a further 4 years to realise that I'm not just autistic, I'm ADHD as well. So now I know why I've got an anxious brain that is constantly whirring with 100 tabs open, many things that could go wrong, and I can medicate it as well. And actually the medication is pretty effective for most people. So one of the reasons that it's difficult to get diagnosed autistic if you've got ADHD as well is because you can possibly be more extroverted, more confident, appearing more bubbly than somebody with a typical just autism presentation. And likewise, if you're autistic, you sometimes have a lot of routines and coping mechanisms in place that help to mask the ADHD. So there's all these people that go through decades and decades, autistic and ADHD, not fitting the profile of either, not getting diagnosed with either. And the medical professionals, they tend to look at one or the other. They don't do a holistic review and work out what's going on. That's why you've got to do it yourself. So I can't tell you how much happier I am now that I know what I'm working with here is AuDHD, as I call it. And I'll explain to you as well why I don't say I have autism or I have ADHD. It's my brain, it's how I'm wired, it's literally me. It couldn't be any more intrinsic, it's not an accessory, it's not some disease I've got either. I've got autism, yeah. Makes it sound like an illness I've picked up. But it's me, it's my identity, I am ADHD. I'm not living with autism and ADHD, can you imagine? So I'm not against unconventional relationships like thruples and things, but if I was living with autism and ADHD, autism, she's a really neurotic bitch. She likes everything just so. And ADHD is a bit of an impulsive, inconsiderate dickhead. So in this throuple, we go to bed, and autism likes the sheets completely smooth, everything's square on, the bedroom's got to be really tidy, no noise at all, absolutely still, no breathing, thanks. Whereas ADHD, he's such an inconsiderate prick. He needs to watch YouTube and then check every notification on his phone. He's got to listen to at least half an hour of trip hop and then put on some sleep sounds, and he's tossing and turning all night, and there's me in the middle. No, it doesn't work like that, they are me. So I'd strongly recommend, especially if you've got anybody at all in the family who's got any kind of neurological difference. I don't call it a condition because it's just part of the human experience. All our brains are wired differently. But if you do have any of the struggles I have, or anyone in your family does, it does run in the family. You don't even need a diagnosis. You need an ADHD one to get the medication, obviously, but just knowing that there's a reason why you struggle with things, that you're not a loser, that you're not defective and broken, that everybody's brain is wired differently and yours is a particular type of brain, and that explains a lot. It's so validating, and it's been so good for my confidence and my self-esteem. Imagine going through life, you're a zebra, you've got these beautiful black and white stripes, and you go through life thinking, none of the other horses have got stripes, there must be something really wrong with me. I'm a horse that's been assembled really wrong. I'm just going to hide in the corner. And then you find a herd of zebra, and you realise that zebra are a thing. And that they're not broken horses, they're beautiful zebras, and they're meant to have the stripes. It really does make life better. Thank you. Any questions?
Take any questions?
Yeah, we can chop the questions off the video recording so that people can talk freely, if that helps.
So what would you advise in terms of getting, you say you don't need a diagnosis unless you need medication.
Yeah, or protection from employment discrimination.
Yeah, so you get kind of, allowances made for you, but how would you recommend people go about finding out they have the condition?
So it's a really good idea to take a long, good look at yourself and what makes you tick and what things you struggle with, but then also do the research. And I don't mean read medical journals, because they follow the medical model of disability, which is there's something wrong with you and we need to fix it. This, autism and ADHD and all those other neurotypes, it's more helpful to look at the social model of disability. So if you're at home in your own environment and you've got control over it, are you okay? When you go out into society and find barriers to inclusion, like an office that's lit too bright or too noisy, or places that are too crowded, things like that, that's the social model of disability. And there's so much information on social media, we can learn from each other. So what I did was I looked at Actually Autistic Twitter, the hashtag Actually Autistic. If you see that on a tweet, it means that that tweet's been written by someone who is autistic, not somebody that thinks they know about autism because they work with autistic kids or they've got someone autistic in their family. They're people that know that they are autistic. They share their lived experience. If you find it relatable, you find a lot of it relatable, then it's really worth going for a diagnosis. And then you talk to your GP. What mine asked me to do was list my traits under relationship issues, social issues, communication issues, things like that. I went a lot further than that. I listed sensory issues and things like that, meltdowns and shutdowns as well. The medical profession seemed to forget about those. So a meltdown is like an overwhelmed explosion of feelings that's beyond your control. It's not a temper tantrum, it's like a major brain event. A shutdown is the other way around. It's you become overwhelmed, so you become unresponsive. And some people do one or the other, some both, but the medical profession know very little about it. And if you think you've got ADHD, if your brain's running too many tabs, if you're hyperactive in body or in mind, because it's not always both, if you can't focus on things unless they're particularly interesting to you, that kind of thing. ADHD, you can get meltdowns with that as well. You can get sensory issues with that as well, but let's face it, there's a massive overlap, and many people have both. If you think you've got ADHD, the best thing to do, if you can't afford to go private, the best thing to do is ask your doctor to refer you for a diagnosis under NHS Right to Choose, because then you can get a private diagnosis rather than waiting 4 years or probably being fobbed off for an NHS diagnosis. This drives me mad, but there was a programme on Panorama not long ago. This comedian, who so obviously had ADHD, made a programme about how if he went to 3 different ADHD clinics, that they would ask him a few questions, do a quick online screening, and then say, yes, you've got ADHD. That doesn't surprise me, because it was obvious to me he had ADHD. Then he went down the NHS route, where they literally want to fob off as many people as possible because they're under-resourced and the medication costs, and said, I'm trying to prove that private clinics dish out ADHD meds willy-nilly. And the NHS clinic, surprise, surprise, said, oh no, you haven't got ADHD. To me, looking at him, I'm happy to armchair diagnose him as ADHD. But, so he's just really set us all back. But yeah, there are clinics that will do it, and they do a really thorough job. But my husband's been through this as well, and his biggest challenge was he didn't have the memories and the evidence from childhood. To get a diagnosis of ADHD, you need to be able to evidence that there's been traits of ADHD throughout your life. It's a lifelong condition. If you just say, I can't stop overthinking, over-worrying, I'm constantly fidgety, I get brain fog, executive dysfunction, things like that as an adult, without the childhood evidence, they're likely to say, no, it's trauma. Because CPTSD, which is a series of smaller traumas, that can actually cause all of the symptoms of ADHD in adults. In an ideal world, you would be able to talk to a medical professional about all of this stuff, and they would do a holistic review and build a picture of your neurotype, because it's an umbrella, you know, the neurological umbrella of conditions. They're not distinct pigeonholes, and humans are complicated, and you can't categorise us that easily. So we're the sum of our neurology and our experiences.
Have you got like main strategies that you use, coping strategies now?
Yeah. So I've quit my day job is a big one. Yeah. But I'm a very systemsy person, so I get around executive dysfunction issues in the house by always making sure I'm on top of the washing, and that I know that the kids, what the kids have got to wear the next day if it's PE or whatever. I always make sure then they've got what they need, and I do all this in advance. There's certain places I'll put things that, you know, I will always keep my keys in my handbag, otherwise I would never find them, and things like that. They're coping strategies. I'm on medication for ADHD as well. The thing that I have to have the most strategies to deal with, though, is my CPTSD. And most people that reach adulthood and beyond that have struggled with having a neurological condition that isn't diagnosed and not making allowances for that accordingly, they will be traumatised, because it's traumatising being a neurodivergent person navigating a neurotypical world. So we all end up with PTSD. I've had quite a few significant traumas as well. So that's why I've given up my day job and gone self-employed, because although I had flexibility in my working from home HR job that I had before, what I couldn't do is say, this is a really bad week for me and I need to do self-care all week. Whereas now I know I sometimes need that, and I do. I mean, there's all kinds, and I had a lot of reasonable adjustments at work, and I've documented them all. I can sit down with people and help them decide what they need as well, and help them advocate for that. So it's more coaching, and everybody is different. I also talk to allies, though, managers, and anyone that works with. Let's face it, we all work with neurodivergent people. It could be your suppliers, your customers, people you work with directly, but there's not actually that many neurotypicals out there. They will become a minority group eventually, I think. But treating people like, not othering them, but respecting that individuals are all different and have different challenges and needs. And not making people feel weird and different when they're socially awkward or whatever. That's great for me. So I actually tell people that I'll say to them, look, if I'm walking past you on the school run and I don't meet your eye and I don't go all right back at you, it's not because I'm not pleased to see you. I'm just a bit socially awkward. My friends accept that about me, and therefore I feel okay about it. And this is the wrong audience for this, but I try and tell recruiters that as well, because the number of people hiring staff, and they think that you've got to make good eye contact and not fumble around spilling your cup of water and things like that, and that confidence, positivity, and all that stuff matters, and it really depends on the job. It usually doesn't. Why put me on the spot and grill me about how I would tackle a particular thing if in my actual job I've got time to think and I'm not face to face with someone staring creepily into my eyeballs? It's just nonsense. But I could scratch the surface here. I have overrun. But there's so many things that people can do that just involve compassion. We are humans. Our difference is our humanity. And that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great talk. I'm sure everyone has learned things and had things they can relate to. And fab. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Chat amongst yourselves.
Are you guys okay keeping those questions in the video, or do you want me to?
Yeah, that's
The
fine.
Q&A was really good. I would say definitely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Size just that size.
Size was like peeping in every window.
Said that